David Keefe of VEIC Efficiency Vermont is a former contractor and well-known teacher with 36 years experience with making homes work better. He has delivered over 1,000 sessions and is known as a personable and friendly teacher who loves to answer questions. In 2011, he was honored by ACI as one of the 25 most instrumental people in building the home performance industry. And in 2017, he was awarded the Linda Wiggleton Leadership Award by the Home Performance Coalition. That's a lot of information, David. So it looks like you really like to teach, you like to teach home performance and help people. And so you taught at a school for a while?
Well, not in a long-term sense, although I've done classes at VTC and UVM, but most of it is technical training for industry professionals, contractors mostly.
Oh, yeah.
And also people who analyze houses and do energy audits and such.
Wow.
Okay.
Interesting.
I think it works. All right. So we'll get started. This is the Residential Building Energy Standards, otherwise known as the Energy Code. We have a new code this year, 2020 version. So this is an overview of the code in general, but I'll also be focusing specifically on the 2020 version. And we've had an energy code in Vermont since 1997. So it's been around for a while, tends to get updated every 3 to 5 years. Our code is based on the national code, the International Energy Conservation Code. So this is a base code that's been adopted by many states. It's a performance-based standard, which means that the intent is that the builder reach a certain level of performance, and there's an attempt here to offer several different ways to get there. That's the idea behind performance-based. We do have some Vermont-specific stuff. So basically in Vermont, what we've done is we've adopted a national code. We've ratcheted up the performance a little bit, and we've added some Vermont-specific stuff. Our code in Vermont does not require involve any system of inspectors. There is no code official for the energy code in Vermont. The way it's set up is it's the legal responsibility of the builder to learn enough about the code to be able to comply with it and to sign a piece of paper that says that they do that. There's currently no system of fines or penalties. The only teeth in the law really, other than a possible difficulty in financing, which we'll get to, the only teeth in the law really is the ability of the homeowner to sue the builder if the building is not in compliance. As I said, it tends to get revised every 3 to 5 years, and we have a new code kicking in this September 1st. So any projects that start on-site construction after September 1st of this year have to comply with the new code. This is a residential code. It covers both new construction and existing homes. Low-rise residential. Low-rise in code language means 3 stories or less. This does not include commercial buildings, but it does include the residential portion of a mixed-use building. So if you have a small apartment building, 3 stories or less, with maybe storefront on the first floor, residential apartments upstairs, the commercial space has to comply with the commercial energy code. The residential space has to comply with the residential code. It also applies to existing low-rise buildings. So if you're building an addition, you have to build the addition basically just like the requirements for new construction. And sometimes when you're changing things in the house, you may need to do something according to the energy code. There is a separate code called the stretch code, which kind of exists alongside the base code. It's a little more stringent. I'll touch on that a little bit more. And it's required for all Act 250 projects. There are exemptions to the code. There's an exemption for extremely low energy use buildings, which is defined as less than 1 watt per square foot of peak load. Peak load means the coldest morning of the year. Less than 1 watt per square foot means that you would need to be able to heat your house on the coldest morning of the year with in layman's terms, 1 or 2 hair dryers. So if you can do that, you're exempt from the code. Mobile homes are formally exempt from the code. These are regulated at the national level, and states are not allowed to put restrictions on mobile homes. Whether it crosses state line or not, it's under federal jurisdiction, not state jurisdiction. Our code does say that if you add site-built components to a mobile home, the most common thing might be putting it on a permanent foundation, then that foundation would need to comply with the energy code. Buildings that are not heated or cooled are exempt. In code language, heated or cooled means heated or cooled by either electricity or fossil fuels. Bio-based systems that do not require electricity, in other words, wood stoves, are basically ignored in the code other than some health and safety stuff. So if the only source of heat in the building is a wood stove, and if there's no fossil fuel or electric domestic hot water or air conditioning, then you're outside the scope of the code. Hunting camps are exempt. This is a Vermont specific thing. They actually defined what a hunting camp was and said you don't need to comply with the energy code in your hunting camp. Historic buildings are not automatically exempt, but there is a provision in the code where if you're planning changes to a historic building and you think that the code is going to interfere with the historic nature of the building, you can go to the Public Service Department and petition for an exemption. As I said, there's a separate code called the stretch code that exists alongside the base code. It's a little more stringent. And this is required for all Act 250 projects. It's also required in any municipality that chooses to adopt it. So individual towns can adopt the stretch code as their base code. The city of South Burlington has done this. I'm not aware of anybody else who has, although I know other towns have been talking about it. I wouldn't be surprised if other towns have done it. The only one I know for sure of is South Burlington. There's also a special provision in the code for what's called owner-builder projects. And the intent here is really that if a person is building a house for themselves to live in, and they're building it themselves, and they're not having a professional build it for them, they can basically build it any way they want to in terms of R values and windows and energy performance. They're not outside the scope of the code altogether. They still have legal obligations. So they are specifically exempted from meeting the technical requirements of the code. In order to do an owner-builder project, you have to meet the definition of an owner-builder. So the most critical thing here is that that individual has to be directing the details of construction. That is, they are running the job site, they're making all the small decisions, they're dealing with the subs, all of that stuff that a general contractor would normally do. If you've got a general contractor working for you and doing those things, then you are not an owner builder. So you have to be able to, you have to be the person running the project. You have to own the building, you have to live in the building. And if you meet those criteria, you can build the building any way you want. But then at the time of sale, you have a bunch of disclosure to do. So you still have to figure out in what way does the building not meet those technical requirements. You have to analyze that, you have to document that on a certificate, and you have to give that in writing to potential buyers before they enter a purchase and sale agreement, so that everybody knows up front that the house does not meet the technical requirements of the code. The house is still legal, but it doesn't meet the performance level of the code necessarily. I mentioned earlier, the only real liability for the builder is that a homeowner can sue. They can sue for increased energy costs, and they can sue for the cost to bring the building into compliance, which could be a significant number depending on how it's not in compliance. So for instance, if they installed windows that don't comply and every window in the house had to be replaced, that would be a significant expense. There is a 6-year statute of limitations on those claims. So some of the folks watching this are probably not familiar with the code. Some folks may already be familiar with the code. So I'll just very quickly run through the major changes for 2020. There are new insulation requirements. The bar has been raised a little bit. This year is also the first year that size matters, that as you build a house bigger and bigger, you're forced to make it a little bit more efficient than you would a smaller house. There's more options for mechanical ventilation. Blower door testing, that is air tightness testing, is now required, not optional. Electric resistance heat is almost entirely prohibited. There are minimum requirements for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. They're pretty modest. And there are also some modest requirements about building in solar ready, which is basically means running the cabling and the connection boxes so that if somebody puts solar on later, it's easier and cheaper to do. Regarding transactions in particular, when the legislature created the energy code, they specifically said that the lack of a code certificate on file in the town land records, because there's supposed to be a code certificate on file in the town land records. The legislation specifically says that the lack of a certificate does not cloud the title, and there's no legal impediment to the sale. So the sale can still go through. But if you're the buyer or if you're the buyer's lender, the lack of a code certificate may raise questions of the value of the property. And there are some lenders in Vermont who routinely look for that code certificate and won't issue a mortgage unless the code certificate is on file, as it's supposed to be. So that's kind of the administrative overview. I'm moving through this pretty quickly. We're not going to talk too much about R values and windows and that sort of thing. It's mostly an overview of the code. What the code requires basically is that the builder do a few basic requirements, about 10 or 12 items, which I'm going to skip through very quickly just so you know what they are, and comply with some ventilation and combustion safety stuff. And choose one of 3 methods to demonstrate that the overall performance of the building is acceptable, that it meets the level that the code requires. The first one is basically picking a package. I'll give you a quick look at that. The second one is using a simple software to analyze that. And the third one is to pay somebody, well, not pay somebody in Vermont, but to get a home energy rating, which is a rating by a third-party professional. In Vermont, they're basically done by Efficiency Vermont. And then the certification, which is the paperwork. So the basic requirements regard all of these things. I'm not going to go through these things in detail. The code does require air sealing, vapor retarders. There's some stuff on ductwork and equipment and all that sort of thing. So these are basic things common to all houses. There's also a requirement for mechanical ventilation. All houses have to have mechanical ventilation. There's a lot of variety this year. We've had mechanical ventilation in our code for 15 years, but now the builder can choose from several different standards. As long as they meet one of those standards, that's acceptable. There's also stuff around combustion safety. Even though unvented gas space heaters are all around in Vermont, and some of them are still being sold, they are illegal to install in residences in Vermont, and that's the case under the current code too, not just the 2021. There are combustion safety stuff in the code. Generally speaking, what they do is they try to make sure that in these tight houses with fans that are pushing air and pulling air around, that the chimneys will still work if there are working chimneys in the house. And of course, in new construction these days, it's entirely possible, and one could argue desirable, to build a house without any chimneys. The code does apply to existing homes. It does not require that anybody upgrade their home, but if you are changing the house in some way, there are some requirements. So the intent here is that if it's convenient and cost effective to bring the house up to code level, then that's what you're supposed to do. The 2 biggest examples of that are basement wall insulation and attic insulation. So if you're in an existing home, you don't have to add insulation to your attic, but if you choose to add insulation, you need to go to the code level if there is room. Same thing with the basement walls. You don't have to insulate your basement walls, but if you choose to put insulation on the walls, you have to put enough insulation to meet the current standard. And if you're replacing windows, you have to put in windows that meet the current standard. Alterations and renovations. This phrase right here is right out of the code, and the basic thing is anytime you're changing any part of the building, there may be some requirement. If you're going to change unconditioned to conditioned space, maybe you're finishing off the basement or the attached garage, there are requirements for that. If you're building a new addition, you have to build it just like you would build a new house. Maintenance and repair is exempt. You don't have to insulate your walls unless you expose them. Once you expose the cavities by tearing off the interior or the exterior surface, they have to be full of insulation when you're done. There's a similar requirement for roofs. There's a requirement for efficient lighting if you're replacing lots of fixtures. Storm windows, glass replacements, standard maintenance stuff, non-energy stuff is all exempt. So I'm moving quickly because I'm cognizant that I'm probably going to run slightly over time. We're past the basic requirements and we're on to how does the builder show that the entire building meets the overall performance requirement. There are three options. One of them is picking a package. You choose one of 5 packages. I'll give you a quick look at them in just a sec. And then you have to earn additional points. And the points you have to earn depends on how big the house is. We haven't had this in the code before, but we have it here now so that if you choose to build a very large house, you are pushed to do a little more than if you were building a modestly sized house. That's what it boils down to. So these are the packages for the, whoops, sorry, I was a little slow there. These are the packages for the base code. I'm not going to go through these in general, but you can see how they're set up. That vertically, each column is a package, and each horizontal row refers to a certain part of the building. So you pick a package, and then in each part of the building, you have to do whatever it says on each individual piece of the building. And once you do that, you are deemed to meet the overall performance requirement. The points are, so as I said, I'm just going to skip back real quick right now and just say the points, whoops. How many points you need to get depends on how big the house is. And so you pick your package first, and then you pick your points. And you can get points by better insulation, better windows. You can get points by doing a better ventilation system. You can get points by upgrading heating and cooling. There's more options. You can get points by having a more efficient water distribution system or having on-site renewables. So the builder can choose from all of these and to make up the points that they need to make based on house size. And then the stretch code, as we said, is basically the same as the base code. There are different packages and you need more points, but the process is the same. Then there is the software method, the second way you can demonstrate overall performance. To use the software method, you have to have balanced ventilation and you have to have a reasonably tight house. And you can't use it for stretch code. The software is free and downloadable from the Public Service Department's website. And what you do is you describe the entire thermal envelope of the building in terms of square footages and R values. The software does all the calculations and tells you whether you pass or not. The screen looks like this, and you can see basically for every part of the building, there's a row, so there's two different ceilings in this building, and you enter the square footage and you enter the R values, and the software does all the calculations and tells you whether you pass or not. The third method to demonstrate overall performance is a home energy rating. This is done by third party, so it's not done by the builder. It has to be done by a person who's certified to do it and issued by an organization that is accredited to do that. In Vermont, all of that is Efficiency Vermont. So pretty much anybody who does home energy ratings works for Efficiency Vermont, and the folks who participate in the new construction program get the home energy ratings as part of that no cost service. Then we'll look at the certificate very quickly and then we'll be done. The certificate provides some details about the house and the builder's signature on the bottom line that the house meets the code. The builder is supposed to fill this out, sign it, file it, that is post it, one copy at the house, one copy in the town land records, and one copy mailed to the Public Service Department in Montpelier. You're supposed to do that within 30 days of completion. That's what the certificate looks like. We're not going to run through it in detail. You can see on the bottom line, there's a place where that's the place the builder signs and basically says, I built this house to code. The owner builder disclosure statement looks almost exactly the same type of information. So in summary, there's a set of 10 or 12 basic requirements. There are requirements for ventilation and combustion safety. There's an overall performance requirement and 3 options for the builder to demonstrate that they meet that. And then there is the paperwork that's supposed to be filed. The Vermont Department of Public Service oversees this stuff. That's their website. That's where all the documents are. That's where the link to the software is and all of that. And there is a toll-free telephone service called the Energy Code Assistance Center that you can call with questions about the code. And with that, I'm done. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you, David. I have a question. How long has it been since they needed to do the that form? Like, how long has that been going? Because, like, I've owned my house for 30 years and 32 years, and I don't ever remember somebody filling that out.
Well, in a house that old, well, the answer to your question is 1998. But in a house the age of yours, if the house was built before that, there was no energy code, nobody would have done a certificate.
Right.
And so on an existing home like that, you would only have a certificate if there's been some work done there that fell under the code and required a certificate. And as a practical matter in Vermont, you may not have gotten it even then, but you should have gotten it. So for example, if you had a contractor come in and insulate your attic in the last decade, that contractor should have filled out a certificate and put it in the town land records. They may not have done that. So, but if you have a home that was built, the code kicked in 98 for Act 250 projects and in 99 for everybody else. So if you have a house that was built since 99, there is supposed to be a certificate.
Yeah, because we blew out our roof and then added a whole entire second story, and I know we don't because we built it.
Oh, right. So, so if you built it yourself, that would have been, when did you do it?
2002.
Okay, so that would have been an addition.
Yep.
You created new heated space. So you would have had to comply with the same requirements as for new construction.
Yep.
If you were running the project yourself, then it sounds like you probably would meet the definition of an owner builder.
Right.
So you still live in the house.
Yep.
So you're actually, if I'm understanding your situation right, you are in compliance.
Yep.
However, when you go to sell the house, you're supposed to call yourself an owner builder, do all the calculations, fill out the statement, and disclose that before you close.
Oh, I'm gonna have to do that. I can't call Efficiency Vermont and then have them do a energy audit.
Efficiency Vermont doesn't do energy audits. If somebody calls us for that, we refer them to our private contractor network who does that for a fee.
That's very interesting because I didn't know any of that stuff. And the thing that I really like about Vermont is that they protect their people, you know, and they, you know, to come up with all these codes and everything, and they want to make sure that Vermonters are saving money by doing all these codes. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're not a professional in the building business. So, and, you know, one other thing about Vermonters is that, you know, we we have a long history of, I don't mess with what my neighbor's doing unless he's causing some harm to me. And I
Right.
think that's where the owner builder thing comes from.
Yep.
And the other thing about the code in Vermont is that there really is, I mean, depending on your point of view, there's either little or no enforcement.
Right.
So that makes a difference.
Yeah.
I would add that was it since Act 89, 4 or 5 years ago, towns that require or that issue certificates of occupancy are supposed to get the code certificate or owner builder disclosure statement prior to issuing that certificate of occupancy. So
Yep, that's right.
seeing a little more teeth or enforcement because of that requirement. It certainly isn't uniform across the state. And actually the Home Builders and Remodelers Association of Vermont for a couple of years now has been on record in support of something to make the code enforced more.
Yep.
They're frustrated with competing against builders who aren't building to code and certifying code compliance.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's been my experience with builders too, is that there's kind of a popular perception that the builders don't want the regulation. But what I hear most often is exactly what Jeff just said, that the good builders are saying, bring on the enforcement because the laws are on the books and I'm trying my best to follow them.
Right.
But the guy I have to bid against isn't.
Right. And, it'd be interesting is to see how many credit unions actually ask for the code certificate.
You've got a potential for a foreclosure and a
Yep.
property then that you would want to move quickly. That code or lack of code certificate could have an impact on the value of that property and trying to resell it after a foreclosure.
Yeah. Yep. Wow, that's very interesting. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, your time. And this is going to be great information for our credit unions.
All right. Well, I appreciate the opportunity and helping us get the word out.
All right. Thank you.